Hey, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. So in this one, let's deal with permissions. Okay, so if we come back to our project folder here, I'm going to close all files. Okay, so there's a function in here inside core, and this function is called user_can. Okay, like this. So at this point, this is the function that allows us to do stuff. Now we need at least one permission that allows everything to go, because here we can check if somebody's an admin, and that's decided by the plugins themselves. There's also here when we are not logged in, so we should add one more special permission here. So we say if in array permission user permission, and that permission exists, then let's return true. Okay, so right here I just want to add one more exception, and I'm going to duplicate this like so. So I'll leave this one as it is, but let's put a permission called O that if it's inside user permissions, then we return true. It means that user is allowed to actually do everything. So that's all right there. So this is kind of like admin, but we're just giving more options. You can either call someone an admin, or you can just give them all permission, or you can do both. Okay, so once we have that done, that's great. Now let's go back to our plugins here and look at the users manager. So let me come back to, let's say, the view part here. Okay, so in the view part here, we look at, in fact, let's go to the list part here. So this just shows the list of users over here. This is the part right there. Now, if a user is not allowed to see this, they shouldn't be able to see it. So we should put some permissions that are required here. We're going to say if user_can, like this, and then we'll put view users like that. So if user can view users like that, then they should be able to see this. Then we're going to put an end if down here, because we started an if statement there. Let me put two of these and change this one to an else like that. And over here we will put a div instead and say access denied, something like you don't have permission for this action, like that. Okay, so now let's put some classes here that correspond to this. This should be an alert and an alert that's red, and then let's centralize the text like so. I'm gonna move this over like this, that way I see things better. Okay, so we know we don't have this permission yet, so if I refresh, this is what I should see. Access denied, you don't have permission for this action. Okay, great. Now what if I try to just navigate to an edit, right, and say users edit /5 like that in the URL. Immediately I get to this point where I can edit a user's page. So in the same way that we did that, we're going to do the same here. Oops, I'm going to put this right at the bottom here, like so, and then move everything else over. I will duplicate this and move it away like so. And then here we're going to say user_can, like that, and the one we want is edit user. So that's edit user. Now these permissions are the ones we gave in the plugin.php, the ones we listed here. Those are the permissions we are trying to add there. Okay, so you must put those permissions There's a jet flying overhead here. Okay, so you must put these permissions here in order for users to be able to be allowed to do this kind of thing. So let's go and do exactly the same for the delete. I will push everything over and then put this down here. All right, great. And then let's duplicate that. Let me move this up. This changes to user can, and this is delete user. There we go. Cool. So same thing with add user here. We want to do the same thing, like so. Let me move this over. Let's put some PHP if user can add user, like so. Okay, good. So delete, edit, view. View should do the same thing. Let's do user can view. So here, instead of view users, it could be in a list, but maybe actually if they can view user details, maybe something like that. View user details, we can add that there. Let me grab this down here up to the end, push over, like so. So let's add that to the list since it's not there. The add user details, so view user details. Let's do that like that. So that's a permission as well. Okay, so that satisfies all of this. Now if I don't have permission to do any of this, see, I can't view users, I can't edit users either. If I go to delete here, I can't delete users either, and also I can't really view a user either. So if I can't view users, or maybe anyway, we can leave this there. You could decide to use an if statement for user can as well to display this. If the user can't delete, can't edit, maybe they don't need to see. If they can't view users at all, they probably don't need to see that. So what we can do is we can go to the plugin.php there, and right here where we are giving we're creating links before a link right here, I could put the user can over here and say if user can view users, like that. That's the only time we should add links, but the return should remain outside because that is mandatory. So yep, that's what we do. If user can view users, then we add this link in the in there. So now that we can't view users, so that link is gone completely, like this. So now I don't have permission, I don't even see that link. Okay, so let's give ourselves a permission to view users just temporarily here. So we can do that by looking at where permissions are given from. So if I go to, I don't actually remember here, this should be in the index page, right? So if I come here, there's this filter here for permissions, right? Before the app is loaded, there's filter user permissions, right? So that's the one we want to use. So it's a filter, so we're going to do this here. Set user permissions for current user, right? So set permissions for current user. So here I'm going to change that to user permissions, like that. I can leave this as it is because the variable name doesn't matter here. As long as whatever you supplied here you return, that's good enough. So here I want to add to these permissions, and if I leave these as is, then it means I have permissions to everything. But let me show you that if I comment this out like that, nothing changes over here. But if I do undo like this, then I have permissions to all of this stuff. Oops, so that doesn't seem to be working at all. Return permissions, user permissions, right? Okay. This should actually work, but it doesn't seem to be working. View users. Let me refresh. Nothing. Okay, let me try and go /users like that. Still denying me access. Okay, so let's try and fix that issue. What's going on here? Now, if I go back to my index page, I want to see what I have over here. So this, I am going to, oh, this is for user permission. So this is my bad here. Do filter user permissions. Okay. Wait a minute. I think I may have made a mistake here. Let's go plugins. This is permissions, right? Huh. Okay, so that's where the problem is. So in the index page here, we have permissions. We also need user permissions. We need two of these things. Right. Okay, so permissions here shouldn't be user permissions. So my bad here. Let's remove this part like that. So this is just for permissions. Okay, that's in the index.php page. But then if we go to our function, where is that function for user can? Let's go to functions. So we go to the user can function here. There is a filter over here for before check permissions right there. So that's the one I want to grab. Anyway, changing things here might be a problem, so let me just leave that at user permissions. Oh no, it's actually permissions. So back here, because that's what we are using here anyway. Let me look at the sample here. What does it say? Samples, plugin sample, it says permissions. So let's leave that as it is. So in the index, I've changed that from user permissions to just permissions. And in the user can is where I was supposed to, let's go functions, user can function. So before check permissions here, right? I think maybe it's easier to just call this one user permissions, right? Because app user permission or blah blah blah, app user permission. So I'll just call it user permissions just to simplify things. So we've changed that in the functions. Let's change it to user permissions there, just to make it simpler to remember, or easier to remember. So there it is. This one puts the permissions that the current user is allowed to do. This one just adds permissions that are possible in this plugin. So all of the permissions here and the ones that the user can access. So it's everything the same, so which means I should be able to access everything. So if I now refresh, you see now we get that users thingy, and if I click on that, now I can do whatever I want. Now I can show you that if I let's say for example the add user and stuff, I want to hide those permissions. So inside user permission I don't give those. So what I'm gonna do is refresh here. Now if I click delete, I'm not allowed to delete, I'm not allowed to edit either, and even add a user I am not allowed to do any of that, but I'm allowed to view because those are the permissions I have here. However, if I put all here, I should be able to do everything as well. So if I refresh and click delete, now I'm able to delete because I am privileged to all the permissions. Alright, now typically these will be coming from the database and not from here. So this is just a temporal measure right now, but this will come from the database instead. So I'm just leaving it here to make sure that we have access. Now keep in mind that somebody can spoof a they can pretend to be oh yeah, so they can't actually do that because we have CRF code there, so they can't pretend to send a fake form, because it's very possible for someone to send a form even though they can't see the, let's say they are denied from editing, right? This is just a typical form. So if somebody else creates this form and they try to submit it, it could be accepted, even though these days that's more difficult because servers now have this thing called cross-origin, where you can't, it checks to see if the server that's receiving is the server that sent the original form in the first place. So that's actually taken care of. We don't even need to use our CSRF code there, but it's just better to have extra layers of security there. So also we need to be able to check, let me come back here, we need to be able to check in the add controller if the user has actual access, because the CSRF code could be valid, everything could be okay, but for some reason maybe they managed to see the form of some kind, or this is a page from they can just edit this page, right? Put a form there and then submit it. That's actually possible. So what we need to do here is to put a user can inside here. So no explanation whatsoever. Let's just put a user can. We'll say if user can add a user, like that. Okay. Then let's do that. And this is the only time we should do any of this code in there, like so. Okay. So if user can add user, we leave that intact. Let's go to delete. We do exactly the same thing. So if user can delete this, that's when we give them access. Let's go here, delete user. Okay, and then finally the edit. So we'll only do this stuff if we have authority to do so. So let me go edit, like that. Okay, so edit, done, delete, done, add, done. Okay, now back to the plugin.php here, which has the permissions. Now instead of adding all of this, I'll just say or here and leave it at that. I'll remove everything. So we are pretending to be an admin at this point. We have all permissions so that even in future, whatever we do, we have those permissions there. Alrighty then, so this is great. Now, one more thing, we need to be able to check. Also, by the way, you can put user can on these buttons so that if somebody is not allowed to do certain things, then they shouldn't even see those buttons whatsoever. So let me just do this, view users. I'll just leave that one permission. So as you can see now, if I click here, I can't see that. Edit, I can't see that. Or delete, I can't see that. Even the add, same thing. So I shouldn't see any of these buttons because of that. So if I go to the list here, because that's what shows the buttons there, so I can put the user can function here and say user can. In this case, this is view user details. That's the one for this one here. So I will copy this, come down here, put one there, come down here, put one there. So this one will be edit user, and this one will be delete user. and let's close with an end if for each one of these. So here I'll put end if, and another end if there, and another end if there, like so. And let's go to the one where we add, which is this one here. Paste. I want that permission from here. So user can add user right there. Okay. So if I now come back and refresh, missing token, right? Let's see what's happening. We're missing an if statement here. Why am I doing? Yeah, so I did this all wrong, right? That's exactly what I did here as well. So let me select all these user can. I put an if statement. Yep, like that. Okie dokie. Let's refresh, and there we go. So now we don't see any of that stuff here. There's an extra, there's that extra there. So as I add permissions here, if I go back to the plugin, there's view users, there's edit user here. If I add those two, then I'm just going to see what I'm privileged to do, right? And if I say add user now, then I get that button too, like so. But I want to have access to all, so I'll just put all there like so, and then come back and refresh, and there we go. Okay, so that's how we deal with permissions, but we need these things to be stored in the database instead of us giving permission here, because what this means is that everyone that's logged in currently now will have all permissions, and that's not ideal. So we have to save different profile details for different people in the database so that we add them from here, right? So at this point where we're doing user permissions, we are supposed to do this. So first of all, I want to check if there are rows that are existing, right? So I'm going to come up here to tables. There is rows table and rows map table, right? So these two tables must have records at least. At least I must have rows. There must be for as long as there's one record in here, then we shouldn't give all access, right? So what I'm trying to do here is that to check if there's any existing rows there. If there are, we eliminate this. If there's nothing, then we give all access permission, because it means no rows have been added yet. So here what we're going to do is let's do db is equal to new core database, like that, and database. So we want to access the database at this point. Now at this point we don't know whether the tables exist or not and stuff like that. So what we will do is also here I will give all as part of the, wait, this is users manager, right? Yeah, all permissions, this won't matter here at all. Let me cut this. So I want to give that permission, but I want to add that in a what's this? Wait a minute. Yeah, this runs on the admin area, so it can work actually right here. So let me leave that be. Okay, so I'll come down here, and I want to read from the database instead. So what I'm going to do is create a query, and the query will go something like select all from. Now I'm going to use vars here, even though I haven't created it here, and this is the rows table, like that. Okay. Select all from rows table, which is that one, and I need vars, so I'm gonna grab this, put it here like so. Okay, so then I can run a query. So I'm gonna go db query like that and say query like so. Now this one is going to be equal to the rows themselves. Now if this returns nothing, then we will do this instead. So we're going to say if empty rows or to be more precise, we can say if is array rows like that. Then else, if it's not an array, then let's just give all access, meaning there are no records there that exist. But if it actually is something, then now we will look for the mapping of rows in the map table. So I also need to know who the current user is. So I'm going to do that by creating a session variable here, like so. Okay. So this one will determine who I am currently, if I'm logged in or not. But also user permissions. All this we don't want to struggle with all of this if the user is not logged in at all. So what I can do is check if user is not logged in first. So we can say if session is logged in like that, then we do this. So I'm going to move this down to the very end, and then let's push everything over inside, because all this just only matters if a user is logged in. If they're not logged in, probably we don't need to add any user permissions because there will be none anyway. So if I'm logged in, we go ahead, get the vars, and we instantiate a database class. Now this part where we're just reading, we just want to know if there are rows at all in the table. So if there are any, if there are any rows, if there are none, then we put all like this. But if some are there, then now we have to look at the rows map table. So I need to know who I am as an ID, as a user, and then read from this table to see which rows I actually represent, and then add those there. So here's there's going to be rows in this table. For example, there's going to be something like let's say if this one is an admin, right? So a person can be an admin, they can be part of HR, they can be part of ICT. So these are user roles, okay? But then there's a permissions table as well. What can they really do as admin? What can they do as HR? So there's one table missing here. Maybe let me rename this. So there's the rows table. This is named just fine. Then there's the permissions table, like that. Okay. Okay, so permissions table, rows table, there's user rows, user permissions. Okay. Now these are not really user permissions. These permissions that a row has. So we're gonna call them row permissions. So permissions table is row permissions. User rows. This is fine because these are rows that are connected to a user. But then these permissions are connected to a row. Okay, so one user can have multiple rows, and each of those rows can have multiple permissions. That's how it is here. And then we have this map here, rows map table. So this one is going to be a map for, in fact, this one will match, wait a second. Interesting here. It seems we're missing another table, one more table. Yeah, because this one shows us what rows map to what, and then we need one more here. User row. So let me just a second here. User rows. Okay, those are rows. Row permissions. So this is connected to the row in there. So now we need a connection between the user and the row. So this one is the one, user rows map. That's great. And since we have a row, okay, so this one is the one that connects to that, so we don't have a missing table. Anyway, if you're not getting it, that's fine. You will get it eventually once we make the actual tables. So what I want now is to have anyway, it doesn't matter really what we are doing in here because we don't have the tables yet. So it would be good when we have the tables, we can design a query to run as we need. But for now, it's going to end up here, and that's fine. So, which gives us access to everything. So if I come back here and refresh, okay, unexpected identifier HR. So these are things I was typing here when explaining. So let me delete those guys. Let's come back here and let's refresh. Okay, so an identified key rows table. Let me copy that. Where is that? On line 48, right about here. So rows table. Okay, so that's unidentified because it's coming from within this. There's a tables array, and that's where it is. So what we need is to say something like tables rows, like that. Okay, so let me refresh. Array to string conversion on line 48. Okay, so that's prohibited, I guess. So what we're going to do is just concatenate this from outside like this, so that we can put quotes like that. So that will work better. So I'm going to do this and refresh. Okay, good. So we still have access to everything. That is nice. Let's leave it at that for now. And one final thing now before we move on. Is we need to be able to check if all these tables exist before we can run our plugin. Right, so let's look at a basic auth plugin here for a second. If I go to the plugin here, this one has tables that it needs, and we haven't written any here. There's the users table, like that. So basic auth requires the users table. Or does it? To authenticate a user, we don't actually need a table, do we? Yes, we do, because we have login and sign up in there. Okay, so we do need a users table. That table is called users. So it's the only table we are reading from, so that should be fine. If I go to login controller, okay, we are using the right. So that's coming, the user class is accessing the users table. So which means we do need that table for this thing to run. And what we can do is right about here, we can access and say something like if. So here we'll say something like check if all tables exist. So it has to check if the tables exist. So we're going to say if we will use the DB table exists DB. Wait a minute, forgotten what this is. It should be inside the DB class. It's table exists. Okay, so if table exists and I want to put an array in there, and this array comes from get value, like that. So when we get a value, I want to access an array item called tables, and that's an array, so we can supply an array to table exists like this. So here I'm gonna put a not over here. So if not table exists, then we're going to die over here with a message and say, please make sure these tables exist in the database. Okay. Now maybe instead let's do this. Let's just say tables is equal to, and I'm going to grab this like so, okay, and then put tables over here like that. Now it's up to you here if you want to exit the entire process, but it's a good idea because if the tables do not exist, maybe you shouldn't be loading that plugin. So you can decide whether you want to put the die here or not to completely exit things if that table does not exist. And then here we'll just implode the tables with a comma. So these are the tables that we need to exist. So if I do that now and refresh, so undefined variable DB, that's understandable. And I'm just going to copy this and put it here and change that to DB and database. Alrighty then. So that's the first thing we should do to check if tables exist. So it says undefined array key result on line 129. Okay, so it seems please make sure these tables exist in the database, and this is users table. Okay, but it's not giving us the correct result because on 129 we have a problem. So let's go back to our database function, database class, sorry. Let's look for 129. And it's right about here. Okay, so what seems to be the problem here is that when we run a query, the result, okay, so when we run the query function, we don't use res like this. We just we don't put that result there, we just do this because we changed things actually in the query function a while back where it was it's returning result already, so we didn't need to repeat ourselves there. Okay, so I'm going to come back here and refresh, and there we go. So we don't have any errors here because the users table does exist, and so everything works as intended. However, if I come back now, let me close all files here. Right in the basic auth plugin here, I'm gonna go to plugin, and I want to copy this part because this part will be on every plugin, since each plugin needs to check to make sure that whatever tables it needs exist before trying to run it. So we go to users manager and the plugin right there, and then I'm just gonna paste things over here. So anything that you run with outside the functions here will run before, just as the plugins are being loaded. That's before they begin to work and run. So this is where this happens. So make sure those tables exist, and these are the tables here. So also this one does require users table, so let's make sure those exist. So this is what we get. Please make sure these tables exist in the database. Users, user role, row permissions, user rows, map. So all these should exist. Now this is not very useful, I guess, because it doesn't show you which ones it didn't find. So that could be a way. I guess there could be a way to do that. Tables exist. Okay, what we can do is let's change things a little bit here so it's more precise. So I'm going to go to database.php. Then here, table exists db. What's that? This table exists db. Wait, I've forgotten what this is. I don't even know what I'm using this for. This is the tragedy of okay, so that's a database for checking if tables exist. Okay, that makes sense. All right, so what I want is table, there's a part, I guess, that checks in a loop my tables count. Okay, so return true. Okay, so at this point here, this is the result, right? If in array, then we count, right? But if not, let's do something else. So here I'm going to do this and put an else statement here. Then what I'm going to do is say this and say none I don't know what we can call it. You know, this is up to you what you want to call these things. Table not exist. What do we call this? Yeah, you know, I want an array to store tables that don't exist. You know what, let's call it missing tables. I think that's better. Yeah, missing tables. So I'm going to do this and then add that current table and do this. Okay, so missing tables. Then I'll grab this because at the start of this, we should always empty this like so before we check. So missing tables is empty, and then finally we have this missing tables here. Then let's declare it here. You don't have to declare it here, but I guess it's good practice. Missing tables, and let's do that. Okay, great. All right. So this way, what this enables us to do is instead of showing us all tables here, we can do instead like db, and then we say missing tables like that. So that way the users table exists, so it shouldn't be part of this list. So I'm going to refresh, and just like that, it actually works. Now you see that these are the tables that are actually missing instead of showing you the whole list. So at this point, we can no longer run anything because we could still run our home page, because there the users manager does not work, is not active. It's only active on the admin page. So if I click on admin, that's when we have problems here. Make sure these tables, instead of make sure, we can just say missing database tables, something like that. That's much shorter. So let's do this. Yeah, that's better. So I'm going to copy that, and basic auth plugin. Let me paste this message as well. It's much shorter. Okay, so there we go. Missing database tables, blah, blah, blah. Now it's usually a good idea also to name the plugin because then the user should know which migration files to run. So we can say missing database table in plugin. Okay, so here we can just pull out the plugin ID. So I'm gonna do this, move out of there and say plugin ID, like so, like that. Okay, so let me copy this from basic auth to users manager and paste it there like this. Okay, so if I now refresh, it says missing database table in users manager plugin, and then it shows me the missing tables. So you could put this on a separate line, I guess. Does a break tag help? Let's see if it helps. Okay, I guess. So yeah, that's how you can do it. But let me just leave it on one line like so. Okay, so in the next video now, we have to run migrations to make sure all these tables actually exist for this thing to run, because it requires all these tables to be active. And then we can look at dependencies here, because already we've seen that basic auth actually can run on its own, but users manager requires basic auth to be active. Yes, because this is where the users table comes from. We don't have a migration file for the users table in the users manager. We have that instead in the basic auth. So these two depend on each other. Actually, just the users manager depends on basic auth. So what we can do is on the config side of things here, we can put dependencies here and say this depends on let's do this. This one depends on basic auth to survive. And then we will put, wait a minute. This requires, yes, something like this. So basic auth, and then here we put a version number. So this one will be 1.0.0. So this is the dependency here. So let's go. Wait a minute, ID. Okay, so we don't have version here, so that's another thing I actually forgot. So we should put version over here. So let's do version. And this one is 1.0.0, comma. Okay, so let me copy this to every other plugin we've created so far. So that's this is the basic auth, version 1.001. And what else? Let's see here. Let's go to the sample as well. Not forget that. There's the JSON sample here. This one. Let's add a version number there as well, so that every plugin we create after this will have a version number. So basic admin, boom. Basic auth, we've added. Header footer, let's add that version. And home page as well, let's add that version number. Okay, cool. What else? Users manager. Okay, pretty good. Now we'll make use of these things in the next video, but for now, close all files. Now everything is cool here. We're just missing these tables, but if we go to the home page, everything runs smoothly here. We can even log in. Let me just try to log out. Let me go to login. We can log in just fine because the table associated with this particular plugin actually exists. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I will see you in the next video.